They found her drifting under the Queensland sun, sails flapping, engine humming, coffee cooling on the table, and not a soul in sight. No distress call, no blood, no wreckage. Just a perfectly good boat, ghosting through calm waters, her crew gone without a trace. This wasn't some offshore race or a deep ocean passage. This was supposed to be a coastal cruise. 3 ordinary blokes out for a slow adventure up Australia's northeastern shore. They had charts, food in the galley, even a laptop still running. Everything pointed to a normal trip, except for one haunting detail. They never made it to Townsville, and no one knows why. The Kaz 2 wasn't lost in a storm. She didn't sink. She was found floating peacefully. But the story behind her is anything but peaceful. It's the kind of tale that makes sailors go quiet. It makes you double-check your safety lines and glance over your shoulder when you're alone on night watch. It's one of the sea's darkest riddles, and maybe one of its cruelest. The Kaz 2 was a 40-foot catamaran. Sturdy, spacious, well-equipped. She wasn't built for racing or blue water crossings, but she was perfect for cruising up and down the coast, especially around the Whitsundays and along the Great Barrier Reef. She was owned by Derek Batten, a man in his mid-50s who worked in real estate. Derek wasn't a lifelong sailor, but he'd grown fond of the sea over the years, enough to buy the Kaz 2 and plot out this voyage. With him were 2 brothers, Peter and James Tunstead, aged 69 and 63. The 3 were longtime friends from Perth. All were relatively new to sailing, but they were cautious, methodical, and excited. This wasn't a rough-and-tumble expedition. It was the retirement trip of a lifetime. A slow and scenic sail from Airlie Beach through the Whitsundays, north to Townsville. They just wanted a good cruise. They had the gear, Jeep VHF radios, life jackets, an EPIRB emergency beacon, charts, a laptop for navigation. They did their safety checks. They told friends where they were going. They stocked up on food and drink. Everything looked by the book. The trio set sail on Sunday, April 15, 2007, departing Airlie Beach under blue skies and fair winds. Winds that day were light, 10 to 15 knots. The seas were friendly. If you were going to pick a day to start a coastal cruise, this would have been it. The first leg of the trip took them past the Whitsunday Islands, a beautiful stretch filled with coral reefs, sheltered anchorages, and postcard-perfect views. They were planning to make short hops, overnighting in protected spots, easing their way north. That evening, they made contact with friends via radio, reporting that everything was going well. No issues. Spirits were high. The last confirmed radio contact came on Monday, the 16th. They said they were near George Point, making good time. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then, radio silence. 2 days after the Kaz 2 set off, on Wednesday, April 18th, the first real sign that something was wrong came from the air. A surveillance helicopter from the Queensland Emergency Services was on a routine patrol along the coast when the pilot spotted a catamaran behaving oddly out near the edge of the Great Barrier Reef, drifting not far from the outer limits of the Coral Sea. At first glance, it looked like any other cruising boat out for a sail, but something didn't sit right. The vessel wasn't anchored or sailing under control. It was slowly circling, powered by its engine, but there was no visible sign of life on deck. The sail was up, but not drawing cleanly. It looked tattered, one edge flapping loose as if it had torn free in the wind. And there was no one at the helm, no movement at all, just a lifeless loop in open water. The helicopter called it in, and a rescue crew was dispatched to intercept. The following morning, on Thursday, April 19th, the boarding team approached the Kaz 2 with caution. At sea, you expect a certain rhythm from a live boat, the way it bobs with purpose, the way voices or footsteps carry over the water. But the Kaz 2 was silent. She had all the signs of a vessel in use: sails up, engine running, systems live, but none of the crew to go with it. Climbing aboard, they found a scene that sent a shiver down even the most seasoned backs. It was like stepping into a snapshot, everything exactly as it would be if the crew had just ducked below for a moment. The engine was humming in neutral. The autopilot had kept her gently tracing loops through the sea, a ghost without a hand on the wheel. The Jeep's display was still glowing softly, charting a course that had, until recently, followed a perfectly logical path up the coast. Inside the saloon, it was the details that unsettled the rescuers most. A laptop sat open on the navigation desk running a basic charting program. Mugs of coffee rested on the table, some half-drunk, some still giving off faint warmth in the morning air. On the galley counter, food was mid-preparation, raw ingredients out, utensils beside them, as if someone had been in the middle of slicing vegetables or making sandwiches. The table was set for a meal that had never happened. Not a single plate had been disturbed. Fishing lines were trailing from the back of the catamaran, rods secured, one line with bait still dangling in the water. One of the crew had clearly been fishing shortly before everything stopped. The tackle box was open but neat, the sort of setup you'd see if someone had just stepped away for a second, just long enough to grab a drink or answer a call from below. All the life jackets were still stowed. The EPIRB, the emergency beacon that sends out a distress signal with Jeep's coordinates, was untouched in its locker. The dinghy, a key clue, was still tied securely to the stern. If someone had intended to abandon ship or ferry to shore, they hadn't used it. No wet footprints, no signs it had been lowered. Everything was pristine, and just as eerie, there was no damage to speak of. Aside from the shredded sail, which looked like it had torn from flapping in the wind, the boat was structurally perfect. No broken rails, no bent stanchions, no blood, no struggle. The cabins below were tidy. Beds made, clothes folded, personal items undisturbed. It was as if the CAS-2 had been gently lifted of her crew mid-sentence. Rescuers radioed in immediately, baffled by the situation. Nothing made sense. It was obvious that the boat had been operating normally just hours before it was spotted. But where had the crew gone? And how? There was no indication that any distress signal had ever been sent. The VHF radios worked. The laptop had full functionality. The Jeep's logs showed no abrupt turns or erratic behavior, just a steady cruise that had slowly drifted off course once human hands were no longer at the wheel. As they towed the CAS-2 back toward shore, every detail of the boat was documented and photographed, and every photo added to the chill. This wasn't a chaotic emergency. This wasn't a rushed evacuation. This was calm, deliberate activity, interrupted. The sea is no stranger to death, but this was different. This was absence. It was as if the crew had simply stepped out of existence, leaving behind their plans, their coffee, their unfinished lunch. Not a hat on deck, not a splash mark on the transom, just a vacuum where 3 lives should have been, and that's what made the discovery so haunting. The boat wasn't derelict. She wasn't battered or waterlogged. She was waiting, as if any moment Derek or Peter or James would come back up the companionway, rub the sleep from their eyes and ask what the fuss was about. But they never did. Theories started swirling immediately. The media dubbed it the ghost yacht. The comparisons to the Mary Celeste came fast and heavy. Everyone wanted to know how 3 grown men could vanish from a perfectly functioning boat in calm weather without leaving a trace. One of the most widely accepted possibilities is the accidental overboard theory. Maybe one of them was fishing off the stern, got pulled in, and the others jumped in to save him. It's easy to imagine James standing with the rod, slipping, yelling. Peter rushes to help. Derek throws off his shirt and dives in. None of them clipped in. None of them wearing life jackets. In minutes, they're in the water, and the boat, left in gear with the helm unmanned, drifts away. But this explanation, as simple and tragic as it sounds, leaves gaps. Why didn't anyone grab a life jacket first? Why didn't they hit the man overboard button on the Jeep? Why was the EPIRB untouched? Could 3 grown men all fall in without one managing to get back aboard or leave a sign? Others speculated that there might have been foul play, that perhaps a fight broke out, though between these 3 men it seemed unlikely. There were no injuries, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Everything on the boat was in perfect order. Some wondered if pirates or criminals had boarded them, but nothing was stolen. The boat wasn't looted. The dinghy was still there. If it had been a robbery or an attack, it was the cleanest one in history. Weather was another possibility. A sudden squall, a rogue wave. But again, the weather logs showed stable conditions. The shredded sail might point to a gust or an error in handling, but not a storm. And there was no other damage. No water inside the hulls. No signs the boat had been tossed around. Then, of course, came the wilder theories. Disappearance into a blue hole, government cover-ups, aliens, spirits of the reef. Those sorts of tales always bubble up when there's nothing solid to hold on to. Most of us don't buy into that. but it shows just how deeply this story rattled people. What we know is painfully little. The Kaz 2 was in good working order. The crew was experienced enough to handle the voyage. The conditions were safe. Their navigation was steady. And yet, they vanished. The jeeps showed their route as expected until the boat began its circular drift. The boat had traveled more than 100 nautical miles after the last contact, moving with the current and engine idling. That engine may have been left running during a maneuver, or it may have been left on accidentally in the scramble to respond to an emergency. But not a single emergency signal was sent. No mayday, no call on VHF, no text, no flare, nothing. In the official investigation, the authorities settled on a likely accidental overboard event. It was their best guess. Maybe James went over? Peter and Derek tried to save him. The wind caught the sail. The boat turned, the engine stayed in gear, and she drifted away with no one aboard. But it still doesn't sit right. You talk to enough sailors, and you'll find most of them don't fully buy it. It's just too clean, too quiet, too precise. What makes this story different from other sea tragedies is the complete lack of aftermath. No bodies, no wreckage, no personal items washed ashore. Just that catamaran, floating peacefully, like she was waiting for someone to come back and take the helm. I've sailed those waters myself. Gorgeous, clear, inviting. You don't expect a horror story in a place like that, but the sea's like that. It's got its own mind, its own moods. 1 second you're enjoying the sunset, the next you're fighting for your life. The ocean doesn't owe us answers, and that's what stuck with me ever since I first heard about the Kaz 2. The silence of it, the absence. These weren't thrill seekers or racers. They were just 3 mates on a dream cruise. Regular guys, the kind of people you share dock space with, chat over sundowners, swap repair tips with, and they just disappeared. To this day, no one knows what really happened aboard the Kaz 2. The boat was found. The story told and retold. But the men, Derek, Peter, and James, were never seen again. No distress call, no wreckage, no closure. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Not the loss itself, but the way it happened. Quiet, sudden, without witness or explanation. Out at sea, we think we're prepared. We've got charts, radio, satellite phones, life vests, perbs. But the ocean is still wild, still vast, still beyond our control. So next time you're out there, engine humming, wind filling the sail, spare a thought for the crew of the Kaz 2. Remember to clip in, check your buddy, keep a hand on the boat, because the sea doesn't always give you a second chance. And if you ever pass by that stretch of reef off Queensland, give a silent nod. There's a mystery in those waters, and 3 souls the sea never gave back.